Thank you all for being here. I'm LaVarn Burton, President and CEO of the American Kidney Fund. We're so pleased to be hosting this congressional briefing entitled Genetic Testing, Is It the Right Choice for You? At the American Kidney Fund, we fight on all fronts to address the crisis of kidney disease, which directly impacts 1 in 7 Americans. Over the last decade, kidney failure in the United States has increased by nearly 30%. This is a dramatic increase felt deeply in communities across America. We're tackling this crisis through our wide-ranging educational initiatives that aim to help people prevent, treat, and manage kidney disease. And our advocacy priorities focus on championing policies and laws that will help ensure the best health outcomes for people. While diabetes and high blood pressure are often seen as leading causes of kidney disease, some forms of kidney disease are inherited. Genetic testing provides vital information that can help guide decision-making about one's medical care. In kidney disease, genetic testing can help patients get a more accurate diagnosis, which can result in better treatment and management of their disease. 1 in 5 cases of kidney disease is linked to a genetic origin, and up to 15% of kidney disease cases have an unknown cause. Rare kidney diseases such as polycystic kidney disease, Alport syndrome, and APOL1-mediated kidney disease have a genetic component, and people with and at risk for these diseases may benefit from genetic counseling and testing, as it can help to clarify decision-making for the development of the right screening and treatment. With rapidly evolving innovation, most facets of healthcare across multiple diseases will incorporate genetic testing in some way. Undergoing genetic testing is a personal decision. Many patients may benefit from counseling and testing to ensure they have a correct diagnosis and a personalized treatment plan to manage their kidney disease. Genetic counselors can provide information about the types of genetic testing available, as well as the benefits and risk of such testing. And they can help you better understand test results. This is why we so strongly support legislation that will improve access to genetic counselors. Increasingly, genetic testing has become a hot topic in the kidney community, one that many people have questions about. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. We're so pleased to be joined by AKF Ambassador Jordan Albright, who lives with APOL1-mediated kidney disease, AKF Ambassador and transplant recipient John Baton, pediatric nephrologist Dr. Ashima Gulati, and genetic counselor and past president of the National Society of Genetic Counselors, Dr. Jillian Hooker. Also joining us by special recorded message is Congressman Adrian Smith from Nebraska, who is the lead sponsor of the Access to Genetic Counselors bill. I hope that you will find this briefing informative and that you gain a better understanding of how increased attention and action to enable access to genetic testing and counseling could improve kidney disease screening and treatment, and perhaps even the prevention of kidney failure. Before we move to our speakers, I would like to thank the American Kidney Fund 2025 corporate members for their support in making today's briefing possible. Our first speaker is U.S. Representative Adrian Smith. Congressman Smith represents Nebraska's 3rd Congressional District. He is a Republican and was first elected to Congress in 2006. He serves as a member of the Ways and Means Committee and is the chairman of the Trade Subcommittee. In 2023, he introduced the Access to Genetic Counselors bill and plans to introduce that bill again in the 119th Congress.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad the American Kidney Fund has my bill on genetic counseling as a legislative priority. As our population continues to age, we must take steps to support the needs of Medicare beneficiaries relating to the best healthcare solutions and outcomes. As you know, genetic counseling services can be particularly valuable for older patients who are at a higher risk of developing many of the diseases testing can detect, including chronic kidney disease, one of the leading causes of morbidity and mortality worldwide. Genetic causes of kidney disease are more common than many realize, as 1 in 5 cases of kidney disease is linked to a genetic cause. Genetic counselors play an increasingly important role in patient health, providing information on the benefits, risks, and limitations of genetic testing, communicating the results, and supporting informed consent and patient choice. Because of the importance of this issue, I have partnered with bipartisan colleagues at the Counselor Services Act. I will be reintroducing this bipartisan bill very soon. The bill would allow genetic counselors to bill Medicare directly for services they are already licensed to provide. Currently, Medicare does not recognize genetic counselors as healthcare providers, which can leave kidney patients without access to a professional who can help them understand how their genetic makeup could impact their health or influence their choice of treatments. Thank you again for having me today. With your support, we can enact this legislative solution and increase access to these important health services.
We thank Congressman Smith for taking the time to record this message for our briefing today. We are grateful for his leadership and partnership, fighting on all fronts for the kidney community and for being a champion for people with rare kidney disease. Jordan, I'd like to start with you because the patient perspective and experience is really what brings us all together today. Jordan, you live with a rare genetic kidney disease. Can you talk about your journey to diagnosis and the role the genetic testing and counseling played?
Absolutely. First and foremost, thank you so much, LeVon, for the introduction. My name is Jordan Albright. I am 27 years old, and I was diagnosed with APOL1 FSGS shortly after my younger brother, Joshua. And our story is a bit unique. He was actually at my aunt's house who had actually donated a kidney to her brother-in-law. So he picked up her blood pressure machine, tried it out, and his blood pressure was extremely high. So much so that everyone kind of passed it around and tried to look at it to see if it was just off, but it was just him. So had to be rushed to the hospital and confirm a few things. And then it led to him testing his protein levels, creatinine, getting a biopsy, where he was able to get genetic testing through NetCure as well. And it led to the rest of my family. I have 5 siblings, so large family. It led to all of us getting tested, trying to look into our own health and confirm that we were also, being proactive with our own situations. And it led to finding that I also had the same thing. So for us, it was all mere chance. And for us, we were also very, very lucky and very blessed to get connected with organizations like NetCure, like American Kidney Fund, whom immediately gave us a lot of resources as far as getting genetic testing, connecting us to different providers, meeting people like yourselves. And it really helped us to kind of gain a deeper understanding as to what it is we're living with, how it affects us. And it really kind of streamlined our process to understand what it is that we're living with. And it really shaped everything. So it shaped a basis for us, provided clarity, and really helped us shape a narrative as far as, our lives and how we can proceed throughout it, everything that we recently learned about ourselves.
Thank you so much, Jordan, for your powerful words and for sharing your story. We'll now move to our next panelist, John Baton from Washington, D.C. John, you don't know the cause for your kidney disease. Can you share your story?
Yes, I'd be happy to. First, hope everyone is having an amazing Tuesday. As LeBron said, my name is John Baton. I'm a resident of District of Columbia. And my kidney story actually began in 2003 when I all of a sudden was, believe it or not, hosting a meeting. I love sharing this story, hosting a meeting with Bono from U2, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and her husband, Bill Clinton, President Clinton. When all of a sudden a week worth of feeling nausea and off sort of hit, and I found myself being rushed to the emergency room. In the emergency room, I was about 3 or 4 hours later informed that my kidneys had failed. had no idea why, had no information about kidney disease, was completely stunned and in the dark. And upon diagnosis, I will say that there was never a biopsy done. So there was no determination as to exactly what had caused my kidney disease. The only clue that we really had was that when I did reach the emergency room, was that my blood pressure was high. So we've always just sort of assumed that that was the case. Moving through my life, I was on dialysis my first time for about 7 years, which included a stint with peritoneal dialysis and then in-center dialysis. Received my first transplant in 2009. In 2016, my kidneys failed once more. And then from that, I ended up doing home hemodialysis and then received my second transplant in 2019. And I'm here today without any complications. Life is great. And I'm really here and interested to have this discussion today because I think there are some questions that the audience has and some concerns, and I'm here to share light with my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your story, John. Our next speaker is Dr. Shima Gulati, a pediatric nephrologist at Children's National Medical Center with a research interest in inherited kidney disease with a particular focus on polycystic kidney disease. Dr. Gulati, thank you for being with us today.
Hi, good morning. And thank you to the American Kidney Fund for advocating this very important initiative.
Let me ask you a question, Dr. Gulati. Which patients would you recommend to have genetic testing, and how would you help patients decide if genetic testing is the right choice for them?
Yeah, I think who should be tested is a very important question. Identifying and assessing the right candidate for genetic testing is really key to the success of this application. We as physicians need to think about those patient factors that will correlate with an increased likelihood of getting a genetic diagnosis. And in most situations, these factors are a younger age of onset of kidney disease, present of a strong family history that appears contributory to the condition that the patient is presenting with. Certain disease categories in kidney disease are more likely to be mediated by a single gene disorder or have a genetic condition that is more likely to be picked up on a genetic test. And having a kidney disease of unclear etiology or unclear cause can sometimes be an indication as well. And then if there is a kidney disease with other manifestations other than the kidney, so extra kidney manifestations in a kidney disease could again be a pointer towards a more broader genetic condition. And then there are conditions in which a physician has a high suspicion for a genetic disorder. So having those conditions and having a higher pretest probability would really determine the key of whether you find something informative on a genetic test or not. Again, helping patients deciding if genetic testing is right for them or not. I think a physician-patient relationship is really one of trust. And as a physician, we need to present all options that are available at that point in time, talking through all the differentials that you are considering and why you think that genetic testing would be of benefit, clinical genetic testing would be of benefit to that patient, would really be a key conversation at that point. As physicians, we need to be aware that there are a lot of apprehensions surrounding DNA testing, and that's in some way rooted historically. And we need to make clear distinctions between what is a clinical genetic test, what is research level testing. And these are all conversations where I think pre-test genetic counseling becomes really very important and helpful. And when we think of genetic counseling, there is a common notion that genetic testing or genetic counseling is mostly post-test or after the results are obtained. But I think this is a situation where pre-test counseling is really helpful when a patient is deciding whether this genetic testing is the right choice for that patient or not, and what are the different strategies that are available and what to choose from them. So I would really advocate for pre-test counseling in those situations.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Gulati. I want to move on now to Dr. Jillian Hooker. who is the scientific officer of healthcare technology company Concert. Jillian, what are the biggest barriers that patients face to accessing genetic testing and counseling?
Thanks, LaVarn. And I'd also just like to say it's such an honor to be here with this panel today and to be a part of it. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Right now, the truth is a lot of the fruits of our amazing scientific labor are not getting out to patients. We've invested so much in the Human Genome Project, in genetics research, in therapeutics research, and specifically in the kidney space. And a lot of that is not getting out to patients today. I think genetic tests are still seen as this sort of newfangled, flashy scientific medicine, despite the fact that they have been in the clinical sphere since the 90s. So increasingly not all that new, but not really making it out to patients. And there's numerous barriers folks face. One of the big ones is just provider education about genetic testing, physicians being really busy and needing a way and needing better tools to keep up with the science and the testing option. And this is where genetic counselors can be really, really valuable. Genetic counselors are healthcare professionals who can demystify genetic testing, genetic options, pathways for patients. So help patients understand what the tests are, how they will help them, make sure their questions get answered, and make sure the correct tests get ordered. One major barrier to genetic counselors today is reimbursement of genetic counseling services. So sometimes you'll hear people say that there's a shortage of genetic counselors. I would say I don't really think that's true, but I think there very much is a distribution problem of genetic counselors because reimbursement for genetic counselors isn't great. They are highly concentrated in academic medical centers. And there are very few genetic counselors working out in community hospitals and community healthcare centers. And there are very few genetic counselors working in the nephrology space. The Access to Genetic Counselor Services Act that was mentioned earlier by Representative Smith and LaVarn is a bill that would add genetic counselors as recognized providers under Medicare, which would allow direct reimbursement of genetic counselors when they see Medicare beneficiaries. And it also sets a precedent that really drives access throughout the entire healthcare system.
Thank you so much, Jillian. And now I want to return to you, Jordan. As Jillian said, these innovations have been around for a while, but they're not always accessible for patients. Could you talk a little bit about what your experience has been? Insurance barriers, for example, can be a challenge. Education issues can also be a challenge. Could you talk about your work with AKF and with other nonprofits on how you're working to support patients on these access issues?
Certainly. For me personally, I do my best to remain educated and learn as much as I can on the topic. So when I have these conversations with other patients, because in my experience, a lot of the time it is a bit easier for me to understand some information and maybe hear it a bit more when I'm speaking with someone that's either living with said disease or has familiar friends, or is directly related to the actual diseases itself. So I realize the more I learn, the more I speak with other people and I'm able to share with them. It really helps us to kind of further push forward a message and understand, what it is that we're all dealing with. So as far as my advocacy work with AKF and other nonprofits, I've been very lucky to be a part of a lot of initiatives such as American Kidney Fund's Patient Access Initiative. I've spoken at the Congressional Black Caucus a numerous amount of times. I have spoken at the Health Equity Conference, is where I'm at currently as well. And I just do my best to be present, aware, and to continue to make myself educated on the topic, just so I can go around and go back to other said patients, including my own brother, and make sure that we have the most recent knowledge, knowing what's out there as far as new clinical trials, new information, and just making sure that every place I go to, I'm shaking hands, I'm meeting people, I'm getting cards, just so I can continue to share information, and connect dots. It's like, this person does that. Mentioning someone like Kent Bresler, who has helped plenty of people find transplants. So just a matter of understanding, okay, this is what you need, this is what you're looking for. Introduce you to someone like Montrez. I can help you with some of these insurance barriers. Just making sure I know the right people, have the right connections, just so I can put patients with some of the right people And again, further harping on education, just continue to be around, meeting people like yourselves, and just being present. I think that's very important, and it goes a very long way with other patients as far as my impact with them.
Thanks so much, Jordan. And you mentioned a really important thing, which is just sharing information wherever you are. You're sharing with your brother, sharing with your family, and sharing with others. So thank you so much for all the advocacy work that you're doing. And now, John, I want to come back to you. Could you talk about the concerns that you have about genetic testing? Why can you tell us a little bit about why you may be somewhat hesitant to move forward with that kind of testing?
Yes, I'd be happy to, but I want to preface the conversation by saying that I am a nerd. I love technology. I love the new developments. I love exploring technology. I just love it. But I have to say that when it comes to genetic testing, my primary concerns are who has access to the data, how is the data being used, and how is the data being secured? Because to me, genetic testing is kind of like the ultimate data that someone can gain to find out more about you. You know, that data can be used by other organizations to deny you services. When it comes to the privacy of that data and how it's maintained, I think it's already been demonstrated on multiple occasions within the past several years of how easily data can be accessed or hacked. 23andMe in December of 2023 had about 6.2 million breaches of personal data. And so that would, I would say, probably is my primary concern. It's not so much necessarily the insurance barriers. I know that is a topic of discussion. People are looking into it. People are researching it. But to me, it's more the privacy access and where this data is being housed and who has access to this data. Because as I said before, time and time again, it's been proven that no matter how secure that we think something is, ultimately it gets hacked, it gets leaked, and then it's used for another purpose. And I'll just throw a random example out. We created AI, but we didn't stop to think about the results of what would happen with AI and all the concerns that were generated around it. So my thing would be is it's created. I think it's great. I would love to do it. I have not done genetic testing yet. I am curious as to, if I have a genetic disorder because there are no other members of my family who have ever presented with kidney disease. Diabetes, yes, but kidney disease, no. But those are some legitimate concerns that I have on what happens next. And it's not like I don't trust people, I don't trust the system. I'm just aware of historical situations that, sort of have fed this fear in me. And I do consider it a fear, despite my affinity towards all things technology and science. So, and I say that in closing, those are my primary concerns.
Thank you so much, John, for raising those important points. And now I want to turn back to our doctors, starting with you, Dr. Galati, and then with Dr. Hooker. Can you address some of the patient concerns surrounding confidentiality and discuss the pros and cons of genetic testing?
Yeah, I think as a physician, we, as a first step, really need to acknowledge that there is a historical and discriminatory past that has led to some distrust in genetic testing. And I think acknowledging that is the first step to then going on to address that. And I think communication is really the key in that piece, where we want to ensure that the patients have a clear communication from the physician and from the genetic counselor, and all the apprehensions and all the discriminations that are part of patients' apprehension surrounding this genetic testing are openly discussed with the patient before the testing is offered. And the genetic counseling piece, again, this becomes relevant because there is a need to clearly communicate to the patient the laws that are there that protect some information, and also the areas which are not protected under the law at this current time. There are concerns for long-term data storage, and especially with a more comprehensive like exome or genome level data storage. And again, I think communication and having the patient weigh in all those options, the risks and benefits of genetic testing really becomes important. Also, I would also like to point out that having an informed consent for, especially for commercially available genetic testing, and especially free sponsored genetic testing that is offered by commercial companies, having an informed consent and understanding what that process of data storage would look like is also very important to be addressed. For, I think, pros and cons of genetic testing, I think there are the pros are when genetic testing is offered to the right candidate with the right strategy, it has the potential to pinpoint an accurate diagnosis. It can lead to an end of diagnostic odyssey for many patients, and that itself can be very satisfying. It may open avenues for specific treatment, and more importantly, it can avoid unnecessary harmful therapies or even invasive procedures that a patient would have been subjected to in the absence of genetic testing. And then it can have benefits for making the transplant process smooth, recognizing some of the recipient characteristics, donor characteristics that are important. And for some patients, it's very important to be part of these rare genetic kidney disease groups or even research participation if it's out there for that particular condition. So there are numerous benefits, I would say. And in the cons of genetic testing, we discussed some of the things, but I would like to also point out that genetic testing, whenever it's offered, there should be a very clear communication with the patient that we may not find the right answers, we may not find any answers. And so having a negative or an uninformative test could lead to further confusion, or could even lead to some variants that are not of any certain significance at this point in medical literature or with medical knowledge. And so that can increase the confusion sometimes as a result of genetic testing. And then genetic testing again could lead to some incidental or unexpected findings that could again put you through another battery of tests or another set of investigations. There are also family members that may be identified who are at risk for similar conditions, and then getting those information to those family members can become more challenging at that point. And talking about all these cons, again, it comes down to the role of the genetic counselor to discuss all this upfront, including with the physician, and having a plan as to how to address these issues if they do arise after genetic testing.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your views on that. Dr. Hooker, would you also address the same question of the patient concerns that were raised? And some of the
certainly. And I think Dr. Gulati laid them out really nicely. But I also think that our profession and those of us in genetics haven't really done a great job of talking about the risks of discrimination. I think in some ways we have overemphasized the hypothetical risks and overemphasized uncertainty and underemphasized the actual data we have about what's happening in this space. I think in many ways, genetic tests, particularly for patients who already have a diagnosis, are another point of healthcare data for them. And they aren't really that different, particularly when they guide their treatment. I think we all have things in our genes that talk about risks for things, but we may also all have things in our genes that will help us get better treatment. And so one fear that I have is that in overemphasizing the uncertainty and the hypothetical risks, we are exacerbating health disparities, because the people who are going to be most sensitive to that messaging are people who have been discriminated against historically, or are members of groups who have been discriminated against. So I do think we need to think really carefully about our language, because the truth is, for folks who have a diagnosis, they're protected under the ACA today in terms of discrimination for insurance coverage based on their diagnoses. The protection we have for genetic testing really pertains more to people who do not yet have a diagnosis. So that would be the family members that Dr. Gulati mentioned, who may have a concern that they will be discriminated against based on future risks. And I think, the law that we have today protects against discrimination on the basis of health insurance and employment. And that was enacted in the early 2000s. And we've had very few challenges to that law. Very few cases have been brought forward or come to the courts where employers or insurance companies were in violation of the law. And that's an important data point to me. And I think part of the why is a recognition that we've all got something in our genes. And so in the end, discrimination based on genetics alone isn't going to make a lot of sense. Right? Genetics is one part of our healthcare data stream and a stream of multiple data points of our healthcare. How we live today, the environmental exposures we have, all of these things contribute to disease risk. And for most of us, genetics isn't as determinative as I think often it's made out to be. So it's my hope that the combination of the laws we have in place to protect people and also education and understanding sort of what are the true risks of things will help make it better over time, make it easier for folks to feel more comfortable with the tests. And also, certainly, as we have technology to protect our healthcare data and respect the PHI and HIPAA laws that are in place to protect our data and recognize that genetics are covered under those laws as well. And not be a barrier for people who can truly benefit medically. So if there's a treatment available, but you need that genetic test to get to that treatment, I would hate for somebody, because of hypothetical fears, not to get the treatment that could really, really help them.
Okay. Thank you so much. All those comments are really very, very helpful. I also want to encourage our audience, if you have questions, we hope to have a little time for some questions. So please put them in the chat. And John, let me go back to you for a second. Have you given any thought to what you think would need to be in place so that you could be more comfortable with genetic testing? I'm sure you're like many other people who are a little bit hesitant about this.
I would say that, well, first, a few enhancements on our privacy laws, I think, would help. Establishing some consequences for breaches when these breaches do occur. I would also like to say that one of the things I'd like to see happen is, I know most people would not be concerned about this, but I do work with several federal clients that deal with security. I would want to know exactly how the data is protected. Like, I'm not going to go into the weeds, like trying to determine what encryption services are being used or what programming and so forth is being used, but I would like to know a little bit about how this data is protected. Fully aware that, someone can, data can be hacked. That's just life these days. Personal computers, government computers, whole 9 yards can be hacked. But I would love to know in these conversations exactly how our data is being managed and how it's being protected. So I think that would give me some ease. And I would also like to end by saying that, I am going to get genetic testing. Mm-hmm. These are my concerns that I've had leading up to this point. But I also think I am of the frame of mind that these days, especially with, hearing everything that's going on, my data is out there already to a certain degree. And so, I think the time for me to worry is kind of bygone. And I think time to looking, to protect my health is a little bit more important. So I am going to get genetic testing. But those were my concerns that I expressed before getting it.
Thank you. And let me turn back to Dr. Galati and to Dr. Hooker. Could you talk a little bit about the availability of insurance coverage for genetic testing and counseling? Maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Hooker.
Yeah, it's very spotty in the kidney space right now. There are very few insurance companies that have specific policies today that specify what they cover and what they don't for renal genetic tests. And I think that's an area where we really need a lot more work. There's reason to believe it's going to get better. NKF came out with a set of guidelines last summer that lay out pretty clearly who should have testing. And I think guidelines are an important part of the path to insurance coverage for that testing. But today, it's really spotty, and there's a lot of work to do to improve that. And what it means if there's no policy on the part of a health insurance company about coverage is most often it means it's going to go for case-by-case review. So a patient gets a test, you go in either for prior authorization or manual review to a medical director at a health insurance company who will review the records and determine whether they deem that test is medically necessary. I think the other thing that will really drive coverage in addition to guidelines are treatments that are targeted based on your genes and your genetic test results. So the APOL1 targeted treatments are likely to be treatments that will only be approved for people who've had genetic testing. And so we start to switch from a place where we say, is this test covered, to more, was the right test done in order to get this drug covered? And I think it's moving in that direction. But today it's very spotty and unpredictable as to what someone's insurance coverage might be for a test. And there aren't many super clear answers out there with most health insurance companies. On the genetic counseling side, it's also spotty. So commercial insurance companies tend to cover genetic counseling. Some Medicaid plans do. And as we talked about before, in Medicare, there's no coverage for genetic counseling services provided by a genetic counselor. An important distinction, though, is that physicians or nurses or PAs who are recognized as providers under Medicare can provide genetic counseling, but often don't have specific training in genetic testing.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, Dr. Galati, I'm going to pose a different question to you, another question from our audience. Can you get genetic testing if you already have reduced kidney function, and if you're not yet seeing a nephrologist?
Yeah, I think making sure that with kidney disease, you are still the right candidate for genetic testing. So would still need a physician evaluation in terms of a detailed personal evaluation, assessment, and also a good family history as available. And, all of those factors would, again, decide whether you are a right candidate for genetic testing. Are you somebody who has a higher probability of finding a genetic condition, and what kind of genetic test is best for you? So I think both a physician and a genetic counselor would be really keen deciding that strategy, which is then going to have the best possible outcome. So I would encourage that.
Okay, thank you. And Jillian, let me come back to you. We have another question from the audience citing a specific example. Someone who wrote, "My son with young children was denied life insurance due to my diagnosis of PKD. Is this typical?"
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I was feeling like I missed that in my earlier remarks, that I recognize that there is federal law to protect against discrimination for health insurance and employment, and that law does not currently extend to life insurance or long-term care insurance. But it's important to point out, and even from this scenario, that life insurers have a long history of using family history, independent of genetic testing, in their actuarial decision-making in the individual market. I think another important distinction when you think about concerns for life insurance is that many Americans who have life insurance get it through their employers, and often that form of life insurance does not take into account your family history, and often not even your personal medical history. And my understanding last time I checked is that's about 50 or 60% of Americans are insured via their employers. Where your personal and family history starts to come in is when you buy insurance on the individual market. So you go out as a private citizen and buy insurance. And that's where these questions start to come up of your family medical history, your environmental exposures, obviously. And they use that in their actuarial decision-making. And there isn't regulation in that space to protect against that kind of discrimination.
Okay, let me ask you a follow-up question. Jillian, where can you find genetic counselors? How do you find them?
Yeah, well, there's a Find a Genetic Counselor tool on the National Society of Genetic Counselors website. So you can just go to nsgc.org and look up genetic counselors in a particular area and find them. There are also increasingly a lot of services available for telehealth genetic counseling, and a lot of great data even to support the idea that genetic counseling can be done just as well in a conversation like this on a Zoom call or by phone as it can in person. So you don't necessarily have to travel 3 hours to the nearest academic medical center to see a genetic counselor. There are options available. although obviously with the limitations we mentioned earlier, that insurance coverage may be spotty.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Galati, could you talk about what is it that you wish patients knew about genetic testing, just based upon patients that you've worked with?
So I think the an important piece, and just in sync with what we are discussing here, would be that for patients to be aware and be active seekers of counseling, and really asking that will I see a genetic counselor? Will I learn about my options and the implications of testing? Because we all realize that there is more than one way to approach genetic testing. There is possibility of more than one outcome, and to really have that active seeking for counseling would be really important.
Okay, thank you. I want to turn back to our patient ambassadors, John and Jordan. When you talk to fellow kidney patients and they ask for advice on genetic testing, what do you tell them? Starting with you, Jordan.
I'd tell them that I personally had a lot of reservations as well, and within my family too. We all had differing opinions, and frankly, that's something I would have not has been open to considering as soon as I did, if not for my younger brother being so steadfast on us being on top of everything and just being open to everything that was available to us, just so we could really understand what it is that we're living with now. And for me and for us as a family, it felt empowering to be able to understand what it is exactly. So I had my grandmother actually pass away from kidney disease as well. This was over 20 years ago. So at that time frame, I don't believe the conversations were as available and present as the knowledge that we have now today. So I just let people know that when I was able to get tested and understand like the exact difference that we have, and something I learned recently is that most humans, or not all humans, Dr. Hooker, please correct me if I'm wrong here. We're about 99.9% similar as far as our genetic makeup. So that 0.1% has drastic changes for us as humans. So for me to understand that I have the G1, G2 mutation, while my brother has G1, G1, meaning that he has even higher likelihood of developing kidney disease. Me having G1, G2 makes me at a higher likelihood of having it, not as much as him, but more likely to do so. It empowered us to have this information and know, again, what is knowledge. Knowledge is power. So being able to have the information was very important to us. So I just let people know our personal experience, how it led to us making our decisions. And I do my best to just encourage them to make decisions for themselves, go home, connect with their families, think about it themselves before they make an informed decision moving forward.
Thank you, Jordan. And John, what do you tell people if they ask you the question about genetic testing?
Well, I tend to focus on education. I always encourage people to educate themselves about any decision that they're making. And although I may have my reservations, I don't necessarily share those reservations with other people because they're my concerns, and I don't want to scare anyone away from doing something that could benefit them. So, one of the first things I do, and this is not a plug, is I always refer them to the American Kidney Fund site for additional information. I then kind of recount, the benefits of genetic testing and one of the reasons they may want to, be of concern. But I also say, as you're doing your education, always look for the pros and the cons, of it as you're making your decision, and to make a decision that works for you. Don't feel like you have to be pressured into doing something that you may not be comfortable with. And I also encourage people that I talk with to have open and honest discussions with the people around them, but in particular their physicians, to make sure that they are, expressing their fears, expressing their concerns. And if you don't feel like you're getting the right information from your physicians, to always, seek additional advice, and when making those decisions. So, I try to make sure that people have, the right direction to go in with little influence about my personal life and my personal decisions. So,
okay. Another question for Jordan and for John. We'll go back to you, Jordan. How can patients get involved in advocacy? And how has being an advocate impacted your life?
I would say a great way for anybody. One, I'm very accessible. So is my brother on just our name and all social media platforms. And we can connect you with a lot of organizations, including American Kidney Fund, that has an amazing program that can help people to learn how to share their stories and help them to kind of guide through the process of understanding how to go about it, the best case scenario for you, because not everyone's comfortable being on certain platforms, being on a stage and sharing their story on a, in front of a lot of folks. It can be very intimidating. So there's different levels to it, and there's so many different ways people can get involved and begin to share their stories and ease into the actual space. And for me personally, it's been very positive. Even when going to these events, and sometimes it can be tough to learn these like cold hard facts about what it is that we are living with. It's very helpful to be around and be able to be on the forefront and hear about these new trials that come up, new drugs that are being created, meet the people that are working on these initiatives, and just being around, be able to share our stories and to help them kind of guideline and go through everything that they're doing. So immensely.
Okay. And John?
So I'm going to keep it short and sweet because I know that we only have a few more minutes
Right.
left. I would encourage you to do exactly what I did. Go to kidneyfund.org and look at the section that's called involvement and sign up to become an ambassador. And from that point, you will also begin to be exposed to other avenues and organizations and so forth that you could just potentially work with to advocate. So that's what I would share with people.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, thanks so much to our panelists, to Jordan, to John, to Ashima, and to Jillian. Your information has been just very informative and helpful, and we so much appreciate it. I encourage everyone watching to learn about AKF's advocacy priorities and find out how to get involved on our website at kidneyfund.org/advocacy. Thank you all, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. This concludes our 2025 Congressional Briefing. Our next session, Path to Diagnosis, Understanding Your Rare Kidney Disease Cause, will begin at 11 a.m. this morning. Be sure to join us for Kidney Action Week sessions throughout this week. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Today, I'm hopeful that we can make a difference.
I'm excited to be here and talk with my congressman from Georgia.
I've never been in DC besides that, 8th grade trip that everybody gets to come in.
Whenever I am here, I get so energized and excited and honestly proud to be a part of something that's bigger than myself.
I'm a little nervous, but I'm gonna go in and share my story and just share from the heart.
I am a 2-time kidney transplant recipient, and it's so important sharing my story here at Capitol Hill, and I'm really honored that AKF has sponsored us to do so.
I just want to give back because I am so grateful to my donor hero and his family for stepping forward.
Always exciting to be able to advocate for kidney patients, including myself, who's been on dialysis for over 6.5 years, as well as been through 1 kidney transplant and looking for a 2nd kidney transplant coming soon.
We want to let our elected officials know what we're going through as kidney patients, kidney survivors, kidney warriors.
The world, I appreciate it. Kidney disease is not a death sentence. With their help, life does continue.
Time is ticking when someone finds out that they need an organ, and we need to act fast. No one should have to die waiting for a kidney on the transplant list.
I just want to see some change for living donors so that there aren't any barriers to donating, and make sure that people with kidney disease have the information that they need. And unfortunately, we're not at a place in medicine right now where everybody knows enough about their kidney health status.
Kidney disease is one of the highest growing diseases that's non-communicable in the United States.
Congressional leaders and senators need to understand that there's 37 million Americans today that suffer from kidney disease, and more needs to be done today to help with education and awareness.
AKF fights on all fronts for people like me.
AKF es lo mejor para los pacientes con diálisis.
It's a wonderful organization that I'm happy to be a part of.